a forestry worker in rural Poland, is mapping storm damage when his boot hits something solid beneath the moss. Not a rock, not a root. Reinforced concrete, buried under 81 years of earth and silence. He starts digging, and what he finds triggers a military investigation that rewrites a piece of World War II history, because hidden beneath this ancient forest was a secret compound that no map had ever recorded, no satellite had ever detected, and no living person knew existed. Inside they found maps, forged documents, a radio that had been transmitting weeks after the war supposedly ended, and in the lowest chamber bones. But this isn't just a story about a hidden bunker. This is the story of General Erwin Feldman, one of the highest-ranking German officers, to vanish during the final collapse of the Third Reich. No body was ever recovered, no grave was ever found. He appeared on no prisoner list, no casualty report, and no surrender document for 81 years. His fate was classified as unknown. His family buried an empty coffin, and the German military archives simply left a blank space where his ending should have been. Then, in 2025, a man in muddy boots stumbled over the edge of a concrete wall, and everything changed. This is not just another World War II mystery. This is the story of a man who tried to disappear and almost succeeded. To understand what was found in that forest, you first have to understand the man who built it. Erwin Feldman was not the kind of general you see in the movies. He didn't shout orders from a marble desk or wave flags at rallies. He was quiet, methodical, and terrifyingly competent. Born in 1,896 inches, the Bavarian city of Augsburg, Feldman came from a long line of military men. His father served in the Franco-Prussian War. His grandfather before him, Erwin, enlisted at 18, fought in the trenches of World War I, and earned an Iron Cross before his 20th birthday. By the time the Second World War began, Feldman had already spent 2 decades climbing the ranks of the German military, not through political loyalty or Nazi party connections, but through results. He was a logistician, a planner, a man who could move 10,000 soldiers across a frozen river in the middle of the night without losing a single supply truck. His superiors respected his precision, his men trusted his judgment, and his enemies learned very quickly that underestimating him was a fatal mistake. But what separated Feldman from most of his peers was something far more dangerous than competence. It was clarity, while other generals still believed in final victory. While Berlin issued orders to hold positions that no longer existed, Feldman saw the truth. The war was lost. He knew it by the summer of 1944, possibly earlier, and unlike those who chose denial or blind obedience, Erwin Feldman began to plan not for victory, but for something else entirely. By the autumn of 1944, the Eastern Front wasn't just crumbling, it was disintegrating. The Soviet Red Army had launched Operation Bagration that summer, and the results were catastrophic for Germany in just 5 weeks. The Soviets destroyed Army Group Center, killing or capturing over 300,000 German soldiers. Entire divisions simply ceased to exist, wiped from the map. They had never been there at all, and the momentum didn't stop. The Red Army pushed west with a speed and ferocity that terrified even the most hardened German commanders. Town after town fell, supply lines were cut off, and units that had held their ground for years found themselves surrounded in a matter of days. Feldman was stationed in occupied Poland, commanding what remained of a mixed infantry and logistics division. His orders from Berlin were simple: hold the line. But there was no line left to hold the positions he was told to defend had already been overrun. The reinforcements he was promised never arrived, and the supplies his men needed to survive, let alone fight, were being diverted to fronts that command still believed could be saved. Feldman watched his force shrink week by week, not just from combat but from desertion, frostbite, and sheer exhaustion. Men who had fought across Russia for 3 years were finally breaking. He filed reports that were honest to the point of insubordination, describing his situation as untenable and requesting permission to withdraw. Berlin's response was always the same: hold at all costs. But Feldman understood costs better than anyone in his command, and the cost of holding was annihilation. On November 14, 1944, General Erwin Feldman sent his final official dispatch to the Wehrmacht High Command in Berlin. The message was brief and procedural, confirming his division's defensive positions along a secondary road network south of Lublin. It included supply requests, ammunition counts, and a casualty summary that painted a grim picture. The communique was logged, received, and filed, and then nothing. No follow-up, no further requests, no situation updates from that day forward. Feldman's name simply vanishes from the military record. What makes this silence so unusual didn't happen. His unit kept fighting. Subordinate officers took command and continued operations for weeks without any formal transfer of authority being recorded. No one filed a report declaring him killed in action. No one reported him missing. No one reported him captured by the Soviets in the chaos of a collapsing front. This kind of gap wasn't unheard of. Officers died in unmarked graves or were taken prisoner without documentation all the time. But Feldman wasn't a junior lieutenant lost in the fog of war. He was a general commanding thousands of men. His disappearance should have triggered an immediate inquiry, yet the records show nothing, no investigation, no search, no questions asked. It was as if the Wehrmacht simply accepted his absence without comment. And that silence is what would haunt historians for decades, because it suggested one of two possibilities. Either the German High Command didn't care what happened to Erwin Feldman, or they already knew. Piecing together what happened on the night of November 14, 1944 has never been easy because the people who were there couldn't agree on what they saw. After the war, Allied intelligence officers interviewed surviving members of Feldman's division, hoping to fill the gap in the record. Instead, they got 3 different stories. The first came from a junior officer named Brandt, who claimed that Feldman had been summoned to a meeting at a rear command post approximately 30 kilometers behind the front line. Brandt said a staff car arrived late in the evening, and Feldman left without explanation. This was not unusual. Generals were called to briefings all the time. But Brandt noted something strange. The car didn't carry standard Wehrmacht markings. The second account came from a supply sergeant named Kessler, who told a very different story. Kessler said he saw Feldman the same evening, supervising the loading of several wooden crates onto a small convoy of 3 vehicles. The crates were heavy, and Feldman personally directed where each one was placed. When Kessler asked what was happening, Feldman reportedly told him to return to his post and forget what he had seen. The convoy departed, heading west, not east, away from the front and deeper into occupied Polish territory. But it was the third account that became the most quoted and the most debated. A corporal named Dietrich claimed he was standing guard near the command post when Feldman walked past in a heavy winter coat carrying a leather satchel. Dietrich saluted, and Feldman paused, looked at him, and said quietly, "The war is over for us." Then he climbed into a vehicle and disappeared into the darkness. 3 witnesses, 3 stories. The only thing they agreed on was this: After that night, no one in the division ever saw General Erwin Feldman again. The war ended on May 8, 1945, and what followed was the largest processing of military personnel in human history. Millions of German soldiers were captured, catalogued, and interrogated by Allied forces. The Americans, the British, the French, and the Soviets each maintained enormous databases of prisoners of war, casualty lists, and surrender documents. Every name was cross-referenced, every unit was accounted for, or at least that he was the goal. Erwin Feldman's name appeared on none of them. The Americans had no record of his capture or surrender. The British, who processed hundreds of thousands of German officers through their intelligence centers, had never heard of him. The French had nothing, and the Soviets, who were notorious for their meticulous documentation of captured German officers, listed no file under his name. This was not simply unusual. It was almost impossible for a man of his rank to slip through every net. A general who commanded thousands of men who signed orders and filed reports for years had somehow left no trace. After November 1944, his family in Augsburg waited for news that never came. His wife, Margaretha, wrote letters to the Red Cross, to the new West German government, to anyone who might have answers. She received the same reply every time: fate unknown. It was a designation shared by thousands of missing soldiers, but for a man of Feldman's rank, it raised uncomfortable questions. Had he been killed and buried in an unmarked grave? Had the Soviets taken him and erased the record? Or had Erwin Feldman done what the Corporal Dietrich suggested and simply walked away from the war? On his own terms, his family held no funeral. They couldn't. There was nothing to bury, just silence, and a blank space in the records where an ending should have been. In the decades that follow, Feldman's disappearance became a quiet obsession for a small circle of military historians and conspiracy theorists, each with their own version of what happened. The first and simplest theory was assassination, some believed. Feldman had been killed by hardline officers within his own ranks, men who saw his pessimism about the war as defeatism or even treason. By late 1944, the Wehrmacht was executing its own soldiers for far less, and a general openly stating the war was lost would have been considered dangerous. It was possible that someone decided Feldman was a liability and dealt with him quietly in the chaos of a collapsing front. The second theory pointed east: Soviet defection. It wasn't unheard of for German officers to secretly negotiate with the Red Army, trading intelligence for safety and a new life behind the Iron Curtain. The Soviets were known to recruit useful Germans, give them new identities, and put them to work in military academies or intelligence operations. Feldman's logistical brilliance would have made him extremely valuable, and the fact that Soviet records contain no file on him struck some historians as suspicious, not proof of absence, but proof of erasure. The third theory was the most dramatic escape through a rat line, the secret networks that funneled wanted Nazis out of Europe and into South America. After the war, hundreds of officers and war criminals used these routes to reach Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. Some lived openly under new names for decades. If Feldman had planned his disappearance, as the evidence suggested, then he certainly had the intelligence and the resources to arrange passage out of Europe entirely. His family heard every theory and believed none of them. Margaretha Feldman spent 30 years writing letters that were never answered. She died in 1978 without ever learning what happened to her husband. Their two sons grew up fatherless in a country that preferred to forget men like Erwin Feldman had ever existed. Now let me take you somewhere else. Entirely away from the war, away from the theories, and into the place where this story was waiting to be found. The forests of eastern Poland are not like the woods you might picture in your mind. These are ancient landscapes stretching hundreds of square kilometers, dense, dark, and deeply silent. In places like the Masuria Lake District and the Białowieża region, the trees have been growing for centuries, forming canopies so thick that sunlight barely reaches the forest floor. The ground is layered with decades of fallen leaves, moss, and root systems that twist through the soil like veins, and beneath all of it, hidden under the earth, are the scars of a war that ended 80 years ago. When the front lines moved through these forests in 1944 and 1945, they left behind an enormous amount of infrastructure: bunkers, ammunition depots, field hospitals, railway spurs, communication lines, and command posts, all of it built in a hurry. All of it abandoned just as fast when the war ended. The people who knew these structures existed were dead, captured or scattered across Europe. And the forest did what forests do. It grew back. Birch and pine pushed through concrete roofs, root systems, cracked open walls, and decade after decade, the soil crept higher, burying everything beneath a living blanket of green. Entire villages disappeared, this way swallowed so completely that today you can walk directly over them without knowing they're there. Farmers occasionally hit concrete with their plows, hikers stumble across rusted helmets or shell casings, and every few years, a construction crew breaks ground and finds something that hasn't seen daylight since 1945. Forest keeps its secrets better than any archive, better than any government, and for 81 years it had been keeping one more. In March 2025, a Polish forestry surveyor named Tomasz Kowalski was doing routine work in a dense stretch of woodland about 40 kilometers south of Lublin. His job was simple: map the storm damage from a brutal winter that had toppled hundreds of trees across the region and assess which areas needed replanting. It was tedious, unglamorous work, the kind of task that involved tramping through mud for hours with a GPS unit and a clipboard. But on the third day of his survey, Tomasz noticed something that made him stop. A section of ground that should have been flat wasn't. The root plate of a fallen oak had torn up a chunk of earth nearly 2 meters across and beneath the tangle of roots and soil. We could see something that didn't belong. A flat, gray surface, smooth and angular. He knelt down and scraped away the dirt with his hands. It was concrete, reinforced, concrete with rusted steel rods, visible where the surface had cracked. Tomasz had grown up in this region. He knew that the forests were full of wartime remnants, but his didn't look like a random piece of debris. The surface was too deliberate. He probed further with a stick and hit more concrete, extending in both directions beneath the moss. He marked the coordinates on his GPS, took several photographs, and called his supervisor. By the end of the week, a regional archaeology team from the University of Lublin had arrived at the site within days of clearing the topsoil. They knew this was not a standard wartime ruin. This was something that had been built with extraordinary care and then hidden on purpose. What the archaeology team uncovered over the following weeks was unlike anything they had seen before. Most Wehrmacht bunkers found in Poland follow a predictable pattern: thick concrete walls, narrow firing slits designed for defense and built to withstand shelling. This was none of those things. The site was a compound spread across roughly 200 square meters, consisting of multiple connected structures, all of them built below ground level and covered with reinforced concrete roofs that had been layered with soil and planted over with vegetation. The construction was meticulous. The walls were poured concrete, nearly a meter thick. The ceilings were supported by steel I-beams, and every entrance was recessed and angled so that it couldn't be seen from more than a few meters away. The first structure they cleared was a living quarters, 2 rooms with the remains of wooden bed frames, a small iron stove and ventilation shafts that ran up through the earth, disguised as fallen logs on the surface. Connected by a narrow corridor was a communications room with mounting brackets still bolted to the walls where radio equipment had once sat. Wiring conduits ran along the ceiling, and a wooden desk had partially collapsed but was still recognizable. Beyond that, they found 2 storage vaults, with heavy steel doors, both sealed shut, and a vehicle bay large enough to hold 3 trucks with a ramp leading up to what had once been a concealed exit. Now completely buried under root systems and compacted earth, the entire compound had been designed with one purpose, and it wasn't combat. There were no firing positions, no defensive perimeters, no ammunition storage. This place was built for one thing: hiding, and whoever built it had planned to stay hidden for a very long time. Once the sealed storage vaults were opened, the archaeology team immediately contacted Polish military authorities because what they found inside changed the nature of the excavation entirely. The first vault contained personal effects, a Wehrmacht officer's field trunk with the initials E.F. stamped into the leather. Inside were uniform items bearing the insignia of a general, a set of binoculars engraved with Feldman's service number, and a leather-bound journal filled with entries in German, written in a precise, disciplined hand. But it was the contents of the second vault that drew the most attention. Stacked against the back wall were wooden crates, 11 in total. Some were filled with rolled canvases, paintings stripped from their frames and packed carefully between layers of oilcloth. Others contained gold items, rings, watches, dental gold, and small ingots stamped with serial numbers that would later be traced to Reichsbank reserves. One crate held bundles of currency, Swiss francs, American dollars, and British pounds, enough to fund a new life in virtually any country on earth. Alongside the crates was a leather satchel containing forged identity documents. 3 complete sets, each with a different name, a different nationality, and a different photograph. All of them Feldman. The documents were expertly made, nearly indistinguishable from genuine papers, and included travel permits, medical certificates, and letters of reference from fictitious employers. Tucked between the documents were hand-drawn maps showing routes leading west from Poland through Czechoslovakia into Austria, and eventually toward the Swiss border. Each route was annotated with distances, travel times, and markings indicating safe houses or contact points along the way. Feldman hadn't panicked. He hadn't fled in the middle of the night. With whatever he could carry, he had spent months, maybe longer, preparing every detail of his escape, and then something went wrong. In the communications room, the archaeology team found something that would prove more valuable than all the gold and documents combined. A logbook, a simple lined notebook filled with handwritten entries, recording radio transmissions sent and received from the compound. The first entry was dated November 15, 1944. One day after Feldman's final official dispatch to Berlin, the transmissions were short-coded and directed to recipients identified only by single letter designations. The messages referenced locations by number, not name, and used a system of time codes that Polish military cryptographers would spend weeks deciphering. But even before the codes were fully broken, the pattern was clear. Feldman had been coordinating his escape in real time, communicating with contacts along his planned route west. The early entries were confident and structured, timed transmissions sent at regular intervals with responses logged within hours. They discussed departure windows, supply caches, and border crossing. Schedules, everything was moving according to plan. Then around late November, the tone began to shift. Responses from contacts became delayed. Then irregular one entry simply reads, K no longer responding, followed by a reroute notation in early December. The transmissions became less frequent and the language more terse. A contact designated M reported increased Soviet patrols along a key section of the planned route. Another warned that a safe house in southern Poland had been compromised. The final entries are undated, as if Feldman had stopped tracking the days. The second to last reads, awaiting confirmation of alternate route. No response. The last entry is a single line written in a hand that is noticeably less steady than the entries before it. Route compromised, remaining in place. After that, the logbook is empty. No more transmissions, no more plans, just blank pages and silence. Beneath the communications room, accessible only through a narrow concrete stairwell that had partially collapsed under decades of water damage, there was one final chamber. The excavation team almost missed it. The entrance was blocked by fallen debris, and standing water had filled the lower section to knee height. It took 3 days to pump the chamber dry and reinforce the walls enough to enter safely. What they found inside would become the most significant discovery of the entire excavation. Human remains, not one set, but 4. They were lying on the floor of the chamber, positioned in a way that suggested no struggle, no violence, just stillness. 3 of the bodies were found near the far wall, still wearing the remnants of Wehrmacht boots and degraded wool uniforms. The 4th was found separately near the base of the stairwell, slumped against the wall, as if he had been the last one sitting upright. Beside him was a Walther P-38 pistol standard issue. For German officers, the magazine was full. The weapon had never been fired. On the right hand of the 4th set of remains was a signet ring, heavy, tarnished, but still legible, engraved with a family crest that matched records held by the Feldman family in Augsburg, a shield divided into quarters with a falcon on the upper left, the same crest that appeared on letters Marguerite Feldman had kept for decades. DNA analysis would take months, but for the investigators on site, there was little doubt they had found General Erwin Feldman. He had made it to his hidden compound. He had waited for a route out that never came, and when it became clear that no one was coming, he stayed. The forest didn't just hide him. It became his tomb. And for 81 years, it kept that secret perfectly. The discovery sent shockwaves through the academic world. Not because one missing general had finally been found, but because of what his compound represented. Within weeks of the announcement, military historians began reassessing everything they thought they knew about the final months of the war. Feldman had not acted on impulse. He had spent months constructing a hidden base, stockpiling resources, forging documents, and coordinating with a network of contacts across occupied Europe. This was not the desperate act of a man running from the enemy. This was a calculated operation executed by a senior officer with the skills and authority to redirect military resources for his own survival. And the question that no one could avoid was how many others did the same. The historical record already documented the rat lines, the organized escape networks that helped hundreds of Nazi officials flee to South America after the war. But those operations were largely run after Germany's surrender. Feldman's compound proved that some officers were planning to their exits. While the war was still being fought, while their men were still dying on the front lines, this revelation forced an uncomfortable conversation about the line between desertion, survival, and complicity. The crates of looted gold and artwork added another layer. Feldman hadn't just been saving himself, He had been funding his escape with stolen valuables, some of which forensic teams traced back to confiscated Jewish property, the image of a competent, honorable. The officer who simply saw the writing on the wall became far more complicated when the news reached the Feldman family in Germany. The reaction was not the relief that 81 years of waiting might suggest. Hi! The eldest son, now in his 80s, declined to speak publicly. His granddaughter issued a brief statement acknowledging the discovery and requesting privacy. The family had wanted answers, but the answers they received were heavier than the truck. Silence that came before them. The forest south of Lublin has been sealed off, now designated a protected military heritage site. The compound has been fully excavated, catalogued, and preserved. The remains of Erwin Feldman and his 3 companions have been removed for forensic analysis and eventual return to their families. The gold, the documents, the radio log, all of it, now sits in a climate-controlled facility in Warsaw, where historians and investigators will spend years piecing together every detail of a plan that was never supposed to be found. But here's the thing that stays with you long after the story ends. This was one compound beneath one stretch of forest found by one man who happened to kick the wrong patch of dirt. On a Tuesday morning across eastern Poland, across Belarus, Ukraine, the Czech Republic, and the Baltic states, there are thousands of square kilometers of forest that have never been properly surveyed, wartime infrastructure that was abandoned. In the chaos of retreat and advance and simply forgotten, bunkers, field hospitals, ammunition stores, command posts, railway spurs, and yes, graves, every year someone finds something. A farmer hits concrete with his plow, a hiker notices a strange depression in the ground. A construction crew breaks earth for a new road and pulls up a rusted helmet or a handful of shell casings. Each discovery is a fragment of a story that the forest has been holding for 8 decades, waiting patiently for someone to come looking, or in most cases for someone to stumble across it by accident. Erwin Feldman thought the forest would protect his escape, that its silence would keep his secret long enough for him to disappear. He was half right. The forest kept his secret for 81 years, but it didn't protect him. It preserved him. Preserved the truth of what he did, what he took, and where he died. The forest doesn't take sides, it doesn't judge, and it doesn't forget. It simply grows over everything and waits. Drop a comment below and let us know, what do you think would have happened if Feldman's route hadn't been compromised? Would he have made it out, or was the forest always going to keep him? Stories like this, they stay with you. You lie in bed at night and your brain just keeps turning it over. What would you have done in his place? Could he have made it out? And before you know it, it's 2 a.m. and you're still wide awake. And if you're someone who deals with that regularly, lying there, mind racing, unable to shut off, I know how frustrating that is. You're exhausted, but your brain just won't stop. And the worst part? The less you sleep, the worse it gets. Your energy crashes, your mood suffers. Everything feels harder than it should. I struggled with this for years. Tried melatonin, white noise, warm milk, nothing worked long term. Then I found something called the 30-day uninterrupted sleep reset. It's a science-based program, no pills, no medication, that actually retrains your brain to sleep through the night. 7 to 8 hours, uninterrupted. Over 30 days it rewires your sleep system. And once you're done, you keep the results. There's a maintenance plan so you don't slip back. Look, if you've tried everything and nothing sticks, this is different. Check the link in the description. Seriously, try it. And I'll catch you in the next story.